Let's get real about something most men don't talk about. Not because it isn't important, but because it's deeply uncomfortable. What you do right after sex says more about your character than anything you did during it. It's easy to perform in the moment. It's easy to lose yourself in the heat and impulse. But when that moment ends, when bodies separate and a hush settles in, there's a space, brief but profound, where everything becomes clear. And how you show up in that space defines whether you're a man of depth or just another forgettable encounter. This is the part men often miss, the post-sex moment. It's not just about the physical leaving, but the emotional one, the disappearing act, the casual disengagement, the mental checkout. You might think it was just a physical act. She might even say the same, but biology doesn't lie. Psychology doesn't lie. A woman's nervous system opens up after sex, chemically, emotionally, energetically. Whether it was a casual hookup or something more serious, she is in that moment vulnerable. Not weak, not clinging, but exposed. And your next move either strengthens her sense of safety or creates confusion, self-doubt, and quiet shame. Now, most men don't intend to cause harm. They're just emotionally unaware. They've been taught that sex concludes with climax. But that's not true. Sex doesn't end when the orgasm happens. It ends when the emotional loop is closed. And that loop doesn't close itself. It requires your presence. That's where real strength lies. In your ability to stay, not necessarily physically, but emotionally and psychologically. In how you acknowledge the moment and her and yourself. When you have sex with a woman, even once, even casually, there is an energetic exchange. You've both opened yourselves, one to give, one to receive, or both at once. If you exit that space without acknowledging the emotional weight of what just occurred, you create a void. And voids get filled with anxiety, assumptions, and projections. What does it look like to show up after sex as a conscious, powerful man? It's simple, but it requires courage. It means not vanishing, not going numb, not pretending it didn't happen. It means being present enough to say something meaningful, even if it's small. That felt incredible. I'm glad we did that. How are you feeling? It's not about over-communicating or getting dramatic. It's about offering your presence instead of your absence. It's about closing the space with awareness. You may think this only applies to relationships. It doesn't. This applies to any sexual exchange, because all sex is relational, even if it's short-lived. And the men who get this, who carry emotional responsibility into their sexual lives, are rare. They don't use sex to prove their power. They use it to express their depth. Esther Perel speaks often about the paradox of desire, that we crave closeness, but we're terrified of what it requires. Vulnerability, attunement, responsibility. And yet those are the very things that transform sex from something transactional into something memorable and even profound. So when a man leans into that discomfort and stays emotionally available in the aftermath, he becomes unforgettable because he does what most men won't. He takes responsibility for the energy he helped create. This isn't about falling in love. It's not about trying to keep her or make promises you don't mean. It's about honoring the moment, the space, and the connection, even if it's brief. Because how you exit a woman's body is just as important as how you enter it. One is instinct, the other is intention. And if you're truly interested in becoming a man of substance, a man who leads not just in the bedroom, but in life, you have to start seeing sex not as a conquest, but as contact, real contact. The kind that leaves impressions, not just sensation. Let me ask you something. What kind of man are you becoming? One who leaves women feeling used, or one who leaves them feeling seen? The kind who disappears after pleasure, or the kind who understands that with pleasure comes responsibility? Because you don't need a relationship to act with integrity. You don't need love to offer presence. All you need is awareness and the willingness to step beyond your comfort and into leadership. Leadership in intimacy doesn't look like control or dominance. It looks like grounding the moment, holding space, speaking truth. It's the quiet confidence of a man who knows that his masculinity is not diminished by softness, but revealed through it. And yes, it will feel uncomfortable at first. You'll feel like you're doing too much. You'll worry about saying the wrong thing. You'll be tempted to pull away. But if you can stay, not forever, just long enough to close the emotional loop, you'll start to understand the kind of power that doesn't come from performance, but from presence. And that is the kind of power women never forget. So next time, don't just think about how you undress her. Think about how you leave her. Don't just ask how to make her come. Ask how to make her feel safe afterward. That's where your legacy lives. Not in the sex you had, but in how you made her feel once it was over. Let's talk about the subtle space between emotional presence and emotional dependence. The fine line that defines how a woman feels in the moments after sex. Because what you do right after being inside her isn't just about what you say. It's about how you leave her feeling. And one of the most powerful things you can do as a man is this: leave her feeling seen, not hooked. This is where most men miss the mark. And it's not out of bad intent. It's often a misunderstanding of masculine energy. Either they pull away too fast, emotionally vanish, acting indifferent in some attempt to protect their ego, or they swing too far in the other direction, clinging, oversharing, overcompensating, trying to fill the silence with words that don't match the depth of the moment. But neither response honors what just happened. Neither response reflects strength, and neither leaves a woman feeling held in the way she subconsciously craves. You don't need to fall in love. You don't need to make promises. But you do need to show that you were there fully. That what just happened between you wasn't mechanical, even if it was casual, because women don't crave permanence as much as they crave presence. When you leave a woman feeling like she was felt emotionally, energetically, erotically, you create something lasting. Not attachment, not dependence, but resonance. That's what lingers. So what does that look like in practice? It's a moment, a word, a glance, a short phrase that affirms the space you just shared without turning it into a performance. It could be as simple as, "That was beautiful," or "You have such an incredible energy." It could even be playful, "Your trouble." Whatever it is, the key is that it's authentic. It comes from a place of grounded masculine presence, not emotional hunger or overcompensation. Because the truth is, most women don't want a man who becomes clingy after sex. But they do want a man who can hold the emotional frequency of what just happened. A man who can be light without being shallow, who can be present without being possessive, who can be close without collapsing into neediness. That balance, emotional clarity without codependence, is what creates safety, and safety is the real aphrodisiac. When a woman feels that safety, that grounded masculine energy, her nervous system relaxes and her defenses drop. She doesn't feel like she's just being used. Even if the sex was casual, she feels like she was part of something that mattered, even if just for a moment. Because being seen, truly seen, is rare, especially in sexual encounters where everything tends to blur into motion and reaction. And this is where language becomes important, but not in the way most men think. It's not about saying the right thing. It's about saying something real, something connected to what you just experienced with her. Not a compliment for her body, not a generic, "You're sexy." That's surface level. Say something that speaks to how she made you feel. "You felt amazing." "I love the way you kissed me." "You're dangerous in the best way." Whatever it is, let it reflect presence. Because here's what most men don't realize. Women aren't just asking, was I good in bed? That question is deeper. They're asking, did I affect you? Was I memorable? Did you feel me? That's the hunger underneath it all, not just to be taken, but to be felt. So when you respond with words that affirm her impact, you meet her in that space. You offer reassurance, not through false promises or overcommitment, but through genuine reflection. And you don't need to do it with poetry, just clarity, just truth. The key is presence without pressure. Don't try to lock her in. Don't become emotionally sticky or overly invested right away. That reads as neediness. And women are incredibly intuitive. They can feel when your praise is actually a bid for reassurance. But they can also feel when it's real. When it comes from a man who has nothing to prove. A man who gives affirmation not to manipulate or secure future sex, but because he's confident enough to express what he feels in the moment and then let go. This is not about emotional performance. This is about emotional precision. You're not saying, I love you. You're not making grand declarations. You're offering a small, powerful, embodied signal that says, I was here. I felt this and I see you. That signal becomes the bridge between the physical and the emotional. It transforms the encounter from something transactional to something transformational. Not because it becomes a relationship, but because it becomes human. And here's the irony. When you do this right, it creates less attachment, not more. Because the woman doesn't leave the experience feeling uncertain. She doesn't have to second guess her worth or wonder what it meant. Your clarity gives her peace. It lets her move forward, whether that's into a next meeting or into closure with dignity. And that is one of the highest forms of respect you can offer a woman. So many men are afraid to express anything after sex. They've been told it makes them look soft or vulnerable. But that's not true vulnerability. Vulnerability is not over-disclosing or emotionally gushing. True vulnerability is the courage to express truth without fear of how it's received. It's the ability to be direct, kind and grounded without needing to be anything else. And when you can hold that kind of energy, you don't become forgettable. You don't become another body in her past. You become a man who left an imprint. Not because of your technique, but because of your presence. And that presence isn't something you need to rehearse or memorize. It comes from knowing who you are, from not needing validation to feel masculine, from understanding that the way you make a woman feel after sex says more about your power than anything you did during it. So don't pull away too quickly and don't cling too tightly. Find a middle ground. Affirm her without seeking reassurance. Make her feel seen, not hooked. That's the mark of a man who leads in sex, in energy, and in life. Because in the end, it's not the climax she'll remember, it's how you made her feel once the fire settled. Here's something no one really prepares you for. Not in sex education, not in locker room talk, and definitely not in mainstream masculinity. What happens next after the act, after the climax, after the heat? What happens in that strange, quiet space when everything slows down and the questions begin to rise? Not necessarily out loud, but quietly, internally in both of you. This is where most men hesitate, not because they don't care, but because they don't know what to do. They weren't taught how to lead after the intimacy. They think the leadership ends once the physical act is over. But in truth, real masculine leadership begins the moment the clothes come back on. Because after sex, especially the first time, you're not just leaving a bed. You're leaving an impression, a signal, a tone. And that tone either creates clarity or it breeds confusion. And confusion, particularly for women in the post-sex window, is almost always experienced as anxiety. Not because they're needy, not because they want a relationship you didn't promise, but because they opened emotionally and physically. And that openness creates vulnerability. If there is no emotional closure or direction after that, the openness becomes uncertainty. And uncertainty turns into internal conflict. Is your job, if you want to be a conscious man, to reduce that emotional static, to offer direction, not control, clarity, not attachment. Think of it as energetic closure. A woman doesn't need you to lock her into a promise, but she does need to know what space she now occupies in your mind, and more importantly, in your intention. Because when you have sex with a woman, casual, romantic, or somewhere undefined, you've started a relational rhythm. Even if it's temporary, even if it's physical, it exists. You created momentum. And momentum without direction crashes. That's where people get hurt. Not from the sex, but from the emotional whiplash that follows a lack of clarity. So, what does clarity look like? It looks like knowing before you leave that space what your next step is and communicating it. Not ambiguously, not passively, clearly. I'd like to see you again, or tonight was beautiful, and I think we both know it was meant to stay in this moment. The message can be gentle, it can be soft, but it must be honest, and it must give her something solid to lean into so she's not left standing in emotional fog. What you're really doing here is anchoring her nervous system. You're saying, here's where we are, here's where I stand. And you're not crazy for wondering. That's leadership. That's care. And that's the mark of a man who understands that sex isn't just physical. It's psychological, energetic, even spiritual. When you provide direction, you're giving her what very few men do, emotional safety. And that safety isn't weakness. It's not softness in the diminishing sense. It's containment. It's structure. It's the gift of a clear signal in a world full of mixed ones. Most men think avoiding this kind of conversation makes things easier, cleaner, less complicated. But avoidance isn't clarity. It's cowardice dressed up as cool. The man who avoids emotional leadership post-sex is not protecting her. He's protecting himself from discomfort. He's not keeping it simple. He's just delaying a necessary truth. And that delayed truth doesn't disappear. It shows up in her nervous system, in the silence between your texts, in the way she second guesses your intentions. And even if you think you made no promises, your absence of clarity becomes a promise in itself, a broken one, because silence is never neutral, it's always interpreted. And when someone's nervous system is vulnerable, they will interpret silence through the lens of fear. So offer clarity instead. Give her a defined path, not a puzzle to solve. If you want to see her again, say it. If it was a moment and not a beginning, express that with kindness. You don't owe her a relationship, but you owe her your truth. And truth, when offered with care, never causes harm. This is why post-sex communication is a test of your emotional maturity. Not just what you say, but how well you hold her emotional field after you've accessed her physical one. Can you own the moment beyond pleasure? Can you handle the weight of her openness without retreating into distance or confusion? And if you can't, ask yourself why. What are you running from? The truth, the responsibility, the intimacy of follow-through. Because if you want to be trusted by women, not just wanted, not just desired, but truly trusted, you need to show that you can lead when it counts, not just into her body, but through the aftermath of connection. And yes, this requires discomfort. It requires honesty. It might mean disappointing someone, but disappointment is not betrayal. Deception is, and silence is. And the subtle withdrawal that leaves a woman questioning her worth is a far greater cruelty than any honest statement you could ever deliver. Her clarity gives her freedom. Freedom to stay, freedom to go, freedom to feel, and most importantly, freedom from doubt. And that kind of clarity doesn't just elevate your connection, it elevates your character. Because the man who knows what he wants and can express it without ambiguity, without fear, without manipulation, that man is rare. That man is respected. That man is remembered not just for what he did in the bedroom, but for how he carried the space afterward, with care, with direction, with spine. So ask yourself, what do you want? Not what do you hope happens. What do you want? And are you strong enough to communicate it clearly, regardless of how she responds? Because in the end, the man who owns his truth, who offers it clearly, gently, and without fear, is the one who turns sex into something more than just a moment. He turns it into a mirror for both people to see who they are, what they need, and where they're going. And that kind of man elevates both her and himself. He is the leader,